To other news this evening, and the Prime Minister says she didn't watch Boris Johnson's speech at a fringe event at the Conservative Party conference today. So Theresa May didn't hear a hall packed with people cheer when the former Foreign Secretary called for her to chuck Chequers, saying it's total fantasy, the idea that it would be possible to bodge Brexit now and negotiate a better deal later. Our Deputy Political Editor, Beth Rigby, reports, and just a warning that there is some flash photography coming up.
Only one show in town today at the Conservative Party conference. Not the Defence Secretary, not the Home Secretary, not even the Prime Minister.
So you head into his speech, Prime Minister.
It's this backbench MP who everyone's come to see.
Have you peaked too soon, Mr Johnson?
Come on, Boris Johnson, is this a leadership bid?
Move, mate.
Not exactly below the radar, an entrance designed to steal the show, and not the type of opportunity the Conservative Party was thinking of. Crowds delighting in his showman's style, he started off with a self-deprecating joke.
I want to also congratulate my friend Philip Hammond for predicting that I will never become Prime Minister. Yesterday I saw he said it, which is the first Treasury forecast in a long time, I think, to have a distinct ring of truth. And
But despite that, he was here with a vision beyond Brexit, in what felt like a pitch to succeed Mrs May.
only by a strong private sector that we can pay for superb public services. And that's the central symmetry of our one nation Toryism. It's only by making the streets safer, and by the way, I don't think it's time we brought back systematic stop and search to end the politically correct nonsense.
All the while hoping his Brexiteer-in-chief credentials will help get him there.
There is time. This is the moment to chuck Chequers.
Trying to change Brexit policy, but with one eye on a bigger prize.
Think he'd make a good Prime Minister?
Of course he would.
Perfect, absolutely perfect. Look at that.
Hello.
That was a splendid speech.
Are you proud of him?
Of course I'm proud of him. Very, very proud of him.
I'm very proud of him. Of course I am.
Too.
That was not just a Brexit speech, it was more expansive, wasn't it?
Well, it was a speech about who we are and where we're going.
A leadership speech.
There's no vacancy and there won't be. He was very clear, we back the Prime Minister.
Do you think that he could be a good Prime Minister for the Conservative Party?
He could in time. Now's not the time.
Do I want him to be Prime Minister? I think my gut feeling is yes.
But perhaps more telling than the speech itself were the moments before, cameras capturing Mr Johnson taking in the crowd. Many a colleague has written him off, his political future tied to the success of Brexit. Waiting in the wings, timing is now everything. Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Well, Boris Johnson has launched a wide-ranging attack on the Prime Minister's plans for Brexit, telling the Conservative conference in the Fringe meeting that her strategy, agreed at Chequers in the summer, was a constitutional outrage that would cheat the voters. Chequers' plan is designed to tie the UK to a common rule book with the EU for trade in goods, which Mr Johnson says would be humiliating for one of the world's biggest economies. The Prime Minister rejected the criticism and said that Mr Johnson's own plans would lead to the breakup of the UK. Our political editor, Laura Kuensberg, has the story.
Hi, folks. Hi.
Deep breath. Was he ready? Was the party ready? This conference hadn't seen anything like this.
Is this a leadership bid, Mr Johnson?
Brexiteer-in-chief. Now the Prime Minister's critic-in-chief.
What is he up to, your son, then?
Honestly, I think he is doing a truly useful and important thing here today.
Boris is the one that they do want to hear, and they want to hear that vision directly from him.
Wondering how big a crowd he'd find.
Boris Johnson.
Discovering more than 1,000. Many who hate Theresa May's so-called Chequers compromise too.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Sit down. Come on. What the Chequers proposals show is that the United Kingdom, for all its power and might and network of influences around the world, for all its venerable parliamentary history, was unable, ultimately, to take back control. Do not believe that we can somehow get it wrong now, bodge it now and fix it later. Get out properly in a year. That is a total fantasy. If we bottle Brexit now, believe me, the people of this country will find it hard to forgive. And there is time. This is the moment to chuck Chequers.
The stage was his, not just on Brexit, his spotlight alone. Except, of course, Boris Johnson is not the leader, not the Prime Minister. Today, at least, she's competing in his shadow.
Did you watch Boris Johnson's speech this afternoon?
No, this afternoon I've been meeting activists, I've been talking to people about the conference, and I've been seeing a party that is in really good heart.
Well, people were certainly in good heart in the Boris Johnson speech. More than 1,000 people cheered him for suggesting, demanding that you drop your Chequers compromise plan. He said it's not democracy if you continue.
Well, first of all, there's one thing we all know about Boris is that he'll put on a good show. But what we've been doing here at conference, of course, and I think what matters to people out there, is what the government does and what we focus on in terms of their day-to-day lives and what really matters to them.
But this is the man whom, until very recently, you trusted to be your foreign secretary. Do you want to just directly stand up to him?
Well, first of all, of course, Boris, when he was Foreign Secretary, signed up to the Chequers plan and then, a few days later, resigned from the Cabinet.
But he's directly challenging your authority, Prime Minister. Now, Boris Johnson has come here today and trampled all over that. You must be cross. How can you put up with it?
Well, there are one or two things that Boris said that I am cross about. He wanted to tear up our guarantee to the people of Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. We are all, he and I, all members here are members of the Conservative and Unionist Party. That's because we believe in the union of the United Kingdom. Northern Ireland is part of that union. And we have a guarantee for the people of Northern Ireland, and we are upholding that. Our Chequers plan does that. It's the only plan on the table at the moment that does.
He left almost as quickly as he arrived. But Theresa May knows that Boris Johnson is not just a loudmouth Brexiteer, but her rival, who will not simply be here today and gone tomorrow.
Let's go live to the Conservative conference in Birmingham, and Laura's there for us. On the eve of the Prime Minister's big opportunity, Laura, what do you think that she's going to be trying to do tomorrow?
Well, Hugh, conference speeches are huge platforms, not just for their own parties, but also for any party leader to use it as a shop window to talk not just to their own side, but to try to reach out to the country. And the Prime Minister, who we've had a glimpse of preparing very carefully for that speech earlier today, will be, I understand, trying to show this conference and all of us that she has fuel in the tank to talk about something else other than Brexit, that she has things that she would like to do for the country, whether that's in health, education or opportunities for people. She wants to show she could be the leader beyond the tangle of Brexit, however difficult it gets, however noisy the political clamour is. She will want to show, and will try to, that she could be the person to change the conversation and really to make a difference to people's lives after the fact of departure, which of course is expected to be March next year. The difficulty for her, of course, is not just that she was overshadowed by Boris Johnson today, is that also it is an open question here already, is whether she really has the authority and the credibility to be the person who can turn the page for the Tories after our departure from the EU.
Laura, thanks again. We'll talk again tomorrow, of course. Laura Kuensberg there, our political editor in Birmingham.
Good evening from the Conservative conference, where in the space of 24 hours, members will have heard two speeches that could decide the party's future and plausibly the country's too. The stage here is now set for the Prime Minister's speech tomorrow morning. Today, though, the spotlight was on Boris Johnson. Just where he likes it, his critics might say. Certainly those among the 1,000-plus audience who queued for more than 3 hours to hear him rubbish Mrs May's Chequers plan for Brexit were probably not disappointed. It cheated the electorate, he said. It was a constitutional outrage. But words are easy, actions much harder to calibrate. So will he launch a bid for the crown, and if so, when?
Nobody really knows where Boris Johnson is heading right now, but normally it's into the limelight.
Is this a leadership bid, Mr Johnson?
This morning, with dozens of cameras all told of his timings, would this be the moment to picture his push to be Prime Minister?
Is this a leadership bid?
Whatever the answer, he's already leading the conversation.
What will we hear from you today?
All too soon you'll hear.
And whether expecting to love or loathe what he said, some queued for 3 hours just to hear him.
Everybody loves him and he has the capacity to win votes more than any politician, and I think the whole queue, if you ask the same question, will agree.
Hands up, who thinks Boris Johnson would be a good Prime Minister? No?
Even he wasn't sure what to make of the crowd, but with his vision for Brexit in his hand, he made a run for the top job.
If we cheat the electorate, and Chequers is a cheat, we will escalate that sense of mistrust.
There was an attack on Jeremy Corbyn, a defence of Conservative values, but with enough MPs filling the front rows to defeat the Prime Minister, it was on her Chequers plan that he'd penned his real poison.
This is not democracy. That is not what we voted for. It is a constitutional outrage. It's not taking back control, it's forfeiting control. And by the way, they know it. This is the moment to chuck Chequers.
Some in the crowd echoed his cry. But most have already made up their mind about Boris Johnson, and few here had changed it.
Very impressive. So, yes, I think it was, we're very pleased to be there.
A leader in waiting?
Yes, definitely.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Boris, go home. There's lots of us in here who don't want to see him as leader.
You know your son. This is a bit of a leadership bid, isn't it?
I completely disagree that this is a leadership bid. This is actually to do with him putting forward a really reasoned objection to the Chequers deal.
But there's no doubt his speech will rival Theresa May's tomorrow. And whether or not he wants to snatch the leadership, well, he's already stolen the spotlight. Paul Brand, News at 10, Birmingham.
The Prime Minister made clear again to Boris Johnson, and everyone else for that matter, that there would be no vacancy at number 10 anytime soon. Not now, not next week, and not after Brexit either. After Mr Johnson's speech, she told Robert Peston about her frustration at his plans to put talks on Northern Ireland's border with the Republic on hold.
How lovely to see you. How are you? The Prime Minister on the eve of perhaps the most important speech of her life.
Oh, busy day, as ever.
Kashi has to sell her controversial Brexit plan to her sceptical members and see off the challenge to her authority from her former Foreign Secretary.
Boris Johnson, not a great secret, is devoting his life to making your life as difficult as possible. What was it that you saw in him when you made him Foreign Secretary?
Well, I thought Boris would be a good Foreign Secretary, and he was a good Foreign Secretary.
So what does she think of Johnson's call for talks to decide how to keep open the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic to be shunted till after we leave the EU next March?
The equivalent of saying we want a no-deal Brexit.
And this is what I find frustrating about what Boris has said, is that you're talking about this backstop in this way. The backstop is a guarantee for the people of Northern Ireland. All of us here, all members of the party and members of the Conservative and Unionist Party, we believe in the union of the United Kingdom, and I think that guarantee to the people of Northern Ireland is important.
So what he said was really unhelpful?
What he appeared to be saying was that he wanted to tear up something which was effectively a guarantee to the people of Northern Ireland.
Now, her big announcement today was a framework for controlling immigration after Brexit.
Will there be a cap on the number of skilled people who are allowed into the country?
Well, what it does is takes a different approach to our migration by saying, actually, it won't be about where somebody comes from, it will be about the contribution they can make to our economy.
And numbers will come down, will they, to those tens of thousands that you promised?
Well, we're still committed to those sustainable levels, as we promised in our manifesto.
Committed to tens of thousands?
Yes, that was in our manifesto.
Yeah. Now, Brexit is dominating all politics. What, apart from getting us out of the European Union, would you like to be your legacy as Prime Minister?
I really worry about a situation where many young people feel they're never going to be able to own their own home. So building more homes is important
Is that
for
the
us.
single biggest thing you'd like to achieve?
There's several things we need to achieve,
Right.
but our modern industrial strategy, setting the economy of the future, saying where will the jobs be in the future and how can we ensure the UK is at the leading edge of new development.
I mean, this is big stuff. I mean, many of your colleagues think that you'll be perfectly happy to go after March the 29th next year. They're wrong, aren't they?
I've always been very clear that there is a domestic agenda. We will carry on that domestic agenda, carry on delivering on the things that I believe are what make a real difference to people's lives day to day. This is about post-Brexit Britain. It's about a post-Brexit Britain that provides opportunity for all its people.
So, if Boris Johnson wants to sit in her seat, she's not giving it up without a fight. Robert Veston, News at 10.
And joining me now is the Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, with plenty to talk about. Can I just start? You've caused quite a lot of offence over the past few days with your comments comparing the European Union to the Soviet Union. You've been asked to apologise today, will you?
Well, I think anyone who actually heard what I said knows that I didn't say the EU is like the Soviet Union. What I did say is if the attitude of the EU to a member of the club who wants to leave is that they should be punished for doing so, then that is not consistent with European values. And that's what I was arguing passionately for, a partnership between the UK and continental Europe as being the right way forward.
You and I grew up with the Soviet Union. We know what it was really like. Can you see why some people are offended by that comparison? And would, given the difficulty of our circumstances at the moment, wouldn't an apology be helpful?
Well, I didn't make that comparison, that's my point. What I actually argued passionately for was that a partnership between Britain and continental Europe has given us peace and prosperity, the like of which we've never seen before in European history, and that's what I want to continue. But that means showing respect to someone who wants to leave the legal structures of the EU, but actually wants to remain friends, and that's what we want.
Let's just deal with Boris Johnson. Was it a leadership bid? Is he going to launch one? Does he have the numbers? What would you say to him tonight?
Well, I think, frankly, the country are far more interested in what Theresa May says tomorrow than what Boris Johnson said today. But I really make two comments. First of all, this isn't a time to have a huge argument about which shade of Brexit we end up with. That's an important debate to have. But right now, the European Union aren't actually really negotiating with us about any shade of Brexit. And what we need is to start a proper negotiation. And Theresa May has put some very serious proposals on the table, thought through. They deal with the issues of the Northern Irish border. They give us frictionless trade. And what we need is to sit down and have a proper negotiation.
Can I just jump in there a moment and say, with the greatest respect, that's an extraordinary admission for the Foreign Secretary to be making just at the 11th hour before we're supposed to leave, that they're basically not negotiating with us at all.
Well, they are negotiating with all sorts of details about the withdrawal agreement, but what we've always said is that we need to also agree what our future relationship is going to look like. And the Prime Minister was very clear after Salzburg, we've reached an impasse. And we need to sit down because we want to have what we call a deep and special partnership with the EU, but it does take two to tango.
But you're not going to get a deal from them as it looks today. I think you would readily acknowledge that. And even if you did, you're not necessarily going to get it through Parliament. That looks rather unlikely. I think a lot of people watching are going to say, well, when are you and the Prime Minister going to come clean and tell us what your real plan is? Because the plan you've got doesn't seem to be working.
All I would say is, Tom, don't underestimate Theresa May. And I would say that to our European friends as well. Don't underestimate our Prime Minister. She is courteous, polite, extremely resilient, and she will only sign a deal that is consistent with the letter and spirit of what we voted for in that referendum.
Very briefly, if it looks like no deal, would you accept the country probably needs another referendum before it makes that momentous move?
I think that would be a terrible mistake. If we had a second referendum, people would say, what about a third referendum or a fourth referendum? No, what we have to do, we're a democracy, one of the oldest democracies in Europe. We have to deliver what the people voted for. But what they want is, yes, to leave the EU, but to have friendly relationships with our neighbours, and that's what we're fighting hard for.
OK, well, thank you for joining us. Critical few months. Let's see how it turns out. And Robert is, of course, with me here to try and make sense of all this. Boris Johnson, is he going to stand for the leadership anytime soon, in your view?
Well, let's be absolutely clear. Talking to the Prime Minister this afternoon, I am absolutely certain she is going to have to be dragged out of Downing Street. She feels, even after she's delivered Brexit, there are other things she wants to achieve. I've talked to members of her cabinet. They know that the moment that she goes, they'll have to foment a crisis of some sort. So Boris Johnson wants to be leader. The man you just interviewed, Jeremy
Hunt.
Hunt, wants to be leader. I have to tell you, half the cabinet want to be leader, but there's no vacancy.
OK. Let's move on. We effectively had Jeremy Hunt just admitting there the European Union isn't bothering to negotiate with us. Is the Chequers plan effectively, dead in the water? Is she going to have to move on with it?
Saw Jacob Rees-Mogg this afternoon. He says no chance of him or maybe 30 or 40 colleagues voting for it. Labour Party very ambiguous about it. Talk to people in Brussels, as I do. They don't like most of it. I'll tell you one person who is not giving up on it.
I think I know the answer to this.
It is the Prime Minister.
OK.
She is going to give it one last push. Let's be clear, this has been the weirdest conference of my life because although it's generated a lot of noise, it's almost irrelevant to our future. What matters to our future are these extraordinarily important negotiations that she is going to have with other European leaders, and Dominic Raab is going to have with his counterparties in Brussels in the next few days. We will witness history. We haven't seen it here.
OK, that's a good assessment. Thank you very much indeed, Robert.